On today's episode, we're sitting down with Jessica Ekhoff, a Chicago area attorney, volunteer facilitator of PSI's Bipolar Support Group, and as of early 2023, a published author of her book, Super Sad Unicorn, A Memoir of Mania. Today we'll hear some lived experience that many parents rarely hear about. Jessica became a mother during the pandemic and will give us a glimpse into her experience with postpartum-onset bipolar disorder, mania, and psychosis. And spoiler alert, Jessica isn't a super sad unicorn anymore. We'll hear about the incredible support systems that helped her get on the road to feeling well again, and how she's supporting new parents in the perinatal period now. To learn more about bipolar disorder, mania, and postpartum psychosis, and how to support folks who are touched by each of these, please do check out today's show notes for links to a wealth of resources. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the I Am One podcast are the speaker's own. Tuning into this podcast is not a replacement for therapy or any other form of professional help. Our discussions cover personal stories of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and may feel triggering to some listeners. Your number one priority is to take care of yourself. So if you are in need of help, please reach out to the PSI helpline by calling or texting HELP to 1-800-944-4773 for help in English and in Spanish. At PSI, we want you to know you are not alone, you are not to blame, and with help, you will be well. Okay, let's get on with the podcast. Jessica, welcome to the pod. We are absolutely thrilled to be sitting here with you today. And I must say that I'm feeling especially inspired by your vulnerability today, because a little thing happened in January. I think it was January. You published a book, and I just finished it last night. It's called Super Sad Unicorn. That's all I'm going to say about it, because I'm sure you will touch on it later in the pod, and your book goes into greater detail than 1 hour of recording time will allow today.
Yeah.
So I don't want to waste too much of your time here, but it was fantastic. I really loved how I was able to, I loved how you helped me better understand what you went through. And anyway, I think that instead of me talking, we're just going to jump right in. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and how PMADs have touched your life.
Sure, happy to. And first off, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to talk to you. My name is Jessica Ekhoff. I live in Chicago. I have a son who just turned 2 years old. His name is Wells. And I'm married to my college sweetheart, Dane. We've been together pretty much forever. We met when we were little baby 20-year-olds at the University of Missouri. Have been together ever since. I am an attorney. I practice trademark and advertising law. I work for kind of a smaller boutique law firm here in Chicago, and I've been there my whole career. So that's kind of me. And then my PMAD story is a long one. So I will
buckle up. We're ready. Our seatbelts are on.
I will condense it as best I can. And then, you can ask questions or tell me if there's parts you want me to elaborate on.
Yeah.
But the short version is that I am one of the 1 to 2 in 1,000 women who experiences postpartum psychosis after having a baby. And then I was subsequently diagnosed with postpartum onset bipolar 1 disorder, which I learned is actually more common than I realized.
Yeah.
But when it happened to me, I had never heard of it. I had no idea that that was a possible outcome. So the way that looked for me, the psychosis symptoms started setting in pretty rapidly after I had my son. I had a very normal pregnancy, very normal birthing experience, nothing out of the ordinary, no history of severe mental illness in my family or for myself. So I was definitely not expecting anything so severe to happen as what happened to me. I had come across references to postpartum psychosis a couple times when I was just reading all the books, listening to all the podcasts about childbirth and new parenthood and trying to get ready. And I thought I was so prepared for anything that could possibly happen. And all I really read about psychosis was it's super rare. It's not going to happen to you. Don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is
thanks for that.
Yeah.
Rewrite that chapter. Come on.
Right. which is incredibly unhelpful when you, in fact, are one of the people who experiences it. So I didn't know what psychosis looked like. I didn't know any of the red flags or the warning signs or symptoms. Neither did my husband. So when it happened to me, we were completely unprepared. So the way it began, it started kind of with what I now know are symptoms of mania. So my son was 2 days old. I was in the hospital. There was a nurse educator who came to the recovery room, and she was just kind of giving some basic taking home baby information about how frequently to wake him up for feeds and, that kind of stuff. And in the course of that conversation, I mentioned that I had worked with a doula, and she said, "Oh, like, that's so great. I've actually been considering getting my certification and becoming a doula myself." And I decided that was like a sign from the universe that it was my sole responsibility to make sure that this woman went through with becoming a doula. And that was just like my mission in life. So I was determined to put her in touch with my doula. I thought that my doula could be her mentor. I left the hospital without her contact information. And then I spent hours calling all these different departments at the hospital, trying to find her contact information so I could put her in touch with my doula. I eventually asked a friend of mine who works at the hospital what the hospital's email syntax was.
Yeah.
So I could guess what her email address was.
I can figure this out. Just give me what I need.
You are real resourceful.
Oh yeah. Manic Jessica is determined. She does not let things go. So I can laugh at it now. It was not funny at the time.
Right.
So I, figured out what I thought her email was. I wrote this long, meandering email to my doula about this nurse and how I thought she would make a great doula and how I thought my doula should be her mentor and all this. So that was kind of like the first red flag that this is unusual behavior. This is what I was doing when my baby was napping. So I wasn't getting any sleep because I was just focused on this project.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay. So are you normally a lengthy email writer? Like pre-baby, pre-diagnosis, this new chapter in your life? What was sort of your approach to, were you always trying to connect people with each other? Were you often writing lengthy sort of
brainstorming?
Yeah, but it's like internal monologue.
Oh, okay, I was gonna say, it feels like we're failing charades.
I know. Yeah. So, because as a non-psychosis experiencer myself, like I'm curious about these types of things because I don't have a frame of reference for this. So can you elaborate?
Yeah, I would basically say that when the mania started setting in, it was like a dangerously amplified version of my regular self. So I am a connector. I do love connecting people with others that I think they would get along with or that I think, they could help each other in some way.
Yes.
So that was normal. The degree to which I was committed to this was not normal, and I am not normally a lengthy email writer. I am an attorney. I have to write a lot of emails for my
You're
job.
concise.
This is billable, guys.
Concise. It's billable. I bill in 6-minute increments. I'm expensive. So,
I just got an email from you today. I feel
how much did that cost you, Dan? No,
yeah,
it was
right?
concise, but I appreciate it.
You'll get the invoice soon.
Oh, okay.
No, just kidding. Just kidding. But no, I normally write pretty concise emails. I always read them a few times, edit them down. So it is not normal for me to be sending like a super long, rambly, incoherent email.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was not me. So that was kind of when the mania started. I would say the symptoms of psychosis set in when my son was 4 days old. We were home from the hospital at that point, and at that time I was breastfeeding, but we were doing like combination feeding. So we were doing some formula too, so that my husband could take on some of the night feeds. And I was doing something in the kitchen, washing dishes, I think, and my husband came in and said, "Hey, Wells is up. I think he's hungry. Do you want to feed him?" And I flew into this rage about how dare you just treat me like a milk machine, and like my only value to my son is my boobs. Like I am more than just that. I am a successful attorney, and how dare you just turn me into a milk machine and nothing more. And I was screaming, which is super, super unusual. I'm not one to raise my voice. Neither is my husband. Like we're not yellers. And I just started screaming about how, like, why are you being like all these, these men that think they can just trample all over women and disregard them? Like, you can't do that. And how dare you? And at one point, I'm like stalking him down the stairs and he's just backpedaling, eyes huge, like, what is going on? And he's saying, like, stop yelling, like the neighbors are going to hear you. And my response was just, yeah, so the neighbors are going to know that, I'm not this quiet little housewife who lives down here. Like, I'm a woman with a voice and, I'm going to scream if I want to. And
yeah.
So this is all way, way, way out of character. This ends up devolving throughout the night into me thinking that my husband was trying to call DCFS to get my son taken away because I didn't want to exclusively breastfeed. And because of that, my husband thinks that I'm an incompetent mother. None of which is true, by the way, but that was the delusion that I was having. So we ended up calling my parents kind of in a moment of lucidity. We called my parents who live a few hours away because my husband, Dane, of course, immediately knew that something serious was wrong, but he had no idea what. So we call my parents, they arrive. And by that time, when they're knocking on the door, I'm convinced that it's DCFS agents coming to take my son. So I throw myself on the ground. I've got a pillow over my face. I'm just screaming when my mom walks in and like, this is how she finds me. And my son was 4 days old. So that's how rapidly things started to go south.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So, because your story, the piece about don't treat me like I'm pigeonholed into this role, right? I can't think of any parent I've ever spoken to who hasn't felt that piece.
Yeah.
But it's not the feeling that. What you're saying is it's that plus, right? It's the amplification, the out of character way, right? You say it, not me.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I identify as a strong feminist, but to interpret my husband's very innocuous question of, do I want to feed my son, as an attack on me and as minimizing my humanity when he very clearly was not doing that, that was the psychosis speaking.
Right.
And you didn't recognize that in that moment, in the multiple moments.
No, not at all.
Yeah. Okay, so this is day 4. You've called for backup. Backup has arrived.
Yep.
Then what?
So then things continue to spiral. I do have moments of lucidity, but there are all kinds of examples of things that are going really, really wrong. So I have lots of these, similar to what happened with the nurse and my doula. I have lots of kind of delusions of grandeur about how it's my responsibility to save people. Like, for example, I watched this episode of The Bachelor and I felt like there was a contestant who was being treated really unfairly. And I thought it was like a potentially abusive situation. And I started again while my son was napping and I should have been sleeping. I started outlining this lengthy letter to ABC about how I was going to contact the Attorney General and I was going to contact the FCC and like making all these threats against them for, what I perceived was their abuse of this contestant. There was another instance when a friend of ours had ordered delivery from this company DoorDash, and I contacted DoorDash to try to give them my phone number for the driver to call when he arrived because our doorbell was broken, and he wasn't able to do it. Like the system didn't give him any way to contact a driver who had already been dispatched. And I went on this, like, I was screaming about how this this huge tech company isn't even giving this customer service person, decent software that he can use. And they're probably paying him the bare minimum. And they've probably hired some fancy lawyer to categorize him as an independent contractor. So he's not getting any benefits. And they're just this, super rich company that's taking advantage of him. And like, I'm a lawyer and I have all this time off for maternity leave and I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to like put my money where my mouth is and I'm going to go after DoorDash. So that's kind of another just delusion of grandeur situation. Lots of other stuff happened too. My thoughts became incredibly jumbled and confused to the point where I developed a stutter. Like I would start speaking and then just lose my train of thought halfway through the sentence and have to start over. It was to the point where I was just writing things down on Post-it notes instead of speaking because speaking was so exhausting. I remember there was one point So my husband reached out to a friend of ours who's a social worker, and she knew about this intensive outpatient program for pregnant and postpartum women. And he immediately contacted them and scheduled an intake interview for me. And when he was trying to tell me he was trying to tell me what time the interview was, and he said something like, okay, we need to leave at 1:45. And I said, you can't say things like that to me because it's so hard for me to figure out what 1:45 is. Like, first I have to figure out what time it is. Then I have to figure out how many minutes is a quarter. Then I have to subtract. Like, that is so hard. I just need you to tell me we need to leave at 2:15.
Right.
So like my thinking was so impaired, I couldn't even do that level of cognition.
At that stage, while this is happening, are you aware that this is not you, the normal Jessica? Or are you like, this is my new life? Do you remember? Or is because the thoughts are so jumbled?
No, I do remember actually, which is kind of interesting given like how much trouble I was having with comprehension. Mm-hmm. But in the moment, when I was in these moments of psychosis, everything felt totally normal. I felt like that, this is just me. I'm just standing up for people. I'm doing what's right. Yeah. It felt totally normal. It did not feel out of character for me. But then there would be these moments of lucidity where I would think, oh my God, something is really, really wrong. Like there was a time when I was having a moment of lucidity and thought, I think this is an emergency. I think something really serious is happening. And I thought, what if I end up needing some kind of intensive care that's not covered by insurance and we have to go into our emergency savings fund to pay for it? Right. I want to make sure that my husband can take all the money out. Like, what if he needs my authorization since it's a joint account? So I went into our room and I got this notebook that I keep on my nightstand and I started writing out this statement that I thought my husband could use if needed with the bank so that he could be able to withdraw all the money in our account. And I was writing things like, here's my name, here's my social security number, here's my address, here's the birth date of my son, here's where I went to college, where I got married, my mom's name and maiden name, my dad's name, here's my signature, here are like other places around the house that you can find my signature so you can compare it and prove that I really am who I say I am, and I grant my husband authorization to take all the funds out of this account. So I felt like that was like a necessary thing to do.
So that's something that was going through your mind besides, outlining emails to ABC and, anyway, all the things. This is happening while your parents are at your house. Your parents, correct?
Yep.
And what happens next? How long until there's some sort of plan in place? I mean, how long are they there? Do you go to the hospital? What happens next?
Yeah. So I mentioned the intensive outpatient program, the IOP. So I did make it to the intake interview for that, which was a whole ordeal because I was with psychosis, you often experience paranoia. And I was experiencing a lot of paranoia, like not just the DCFS thing. I was also very paranoid about the idea that these forms that I had to fill out before the intake interview, which were just like, in retrospect, they were just basic like medical intake forms, like what you would fill out at any doctor's office.
Like, are you allergic to anything? Like that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. I felt like they were trying to trick me and get me to admit something that would result in my son getting taken away. So I was like very paranoid about that. I spent 2 to 3 hours filling out these forms and I have disclaimers all over the place. I had asterisks because I thought that the questions, again, I thought they were trying to trick me. So like one of the questions was, do you drink? Which, again, like normal doctor's office intake form question. And I was like, oh, they're trying to trick me because you're not supposed to drink within a couple hours of when you're going to breastfeed. And they're tricking me. They think that I don't know that. And so I answered the question, yes, I drink. But then I drew an asterisk and I included this disclaimer about how I know you can't drink 2 hours before breastfeeding. And yes, I had a glass of wine last night, but it was right after I fed my son and there was formula in the fridge and there was also breast milk in the fridge and my parents were both there and my husband was there if my son woke up. So I was like very concerned that they were going to take my admission that I had one glass of wine as me being an unfit mother.
Right. Which of course you're not. So
yeah, thank you. But I thought that's what the forms were trying to do. So I make it through this interview. Unsurprisingly, they determined that I qualify for the program. So I think it was a Saturday when I did the intake interview and I was supposed to start the program on Monday. But the next day on Sunday, everything just nosedived. And I ended up at 2 a.m. having this delusion that my husband was having a mental health crisis. And I thought maybe my son and I were not safe. And so I locked myself in a closet 2 a.m. and called a friend and begged her to come and pick me up. And she was able to kind of like talk me down enough to get me to agree that like, okay, sleep on it, like wait until the morning, see how you feel. But that was not enough. So then I proceed to call my father-in-law and tell him, I think your son is having this crisis and I don't have the bandwidth to deal with it. Like I need you to deal with it. And I'm just screaming at him and cursing at him, which is very, very
character.
Very out of character. My husband hears this and I can hear him out in the hallway on the phone. And so I like throw open the door and storm into the hallway and demand to know who he's talking to. And I realize from what he's saying that he's on the phone with 911. Mm-hmm. And I say, how dare you call 911 on me? You're the one having a crisis, not me. I'm going to call 911 on you. So then I proceed to call 911 and say that I need them to come because my husband is having this crisis. So the paramedics show up. They get me into an ambulance. I think I'm getting into the ambulance to go support my husband, who I think is about to get admitted to the hospital. I get taken to the hospital and put in this interview room. And I remember the nurse asking me to get into a hospital gown. And I said, I understand that, maybe you want me to be doing this kind of like role play thing to try and keep my husband calm. Like maybe you need him to think that I'm the patient and he's the support person. Because that's going to help keep him calm or something. I get that, but I feel like me putting on this gown is just a step too far. Like, is this really necessary? And they were like, yeah, we do need you to get into the gown. And so I finally do. And I remember looking outside, the room was glass. And I looked outside and I could see my husband talking to a doctor and he's just in his street clothes. And I was like, why am I in a gown and he doesn't have to be in a gown, And a nurse comes in and is asking me all these questions. And finally, the doctor and my husband, Dane, come in and the doctor has us both sit down. And he asks my husband, why do you think you're here? And my husband says, I think my wife is having some sort of mental health crisis. And I look at the doctor and I'm like, see, he thinks that I'm the one with the problem. Like, do you see what I'm dealing with right now? And then the doctor turns to me and says, okay, Jessica, why do you think we're here? And I said, because my husband is clearly having some sort of crisis. And the doctor just very kindly and very gently looks at me and says, I know that this is hard for you to understand and hard for you to believe, but we actually are here because of you. And I was just floored. Mm-hmm. I was floored. I was 100% positive that we were there because of my husband. But I have a lot of faith in doctors. I've been fortunate to get good medical care throughout my life. And I thought, I feel like I'm fine. But if this doctor is saying that I'm the one who's having some sort of issue, like, he's the expert, so I guess that must be right, even though like it doesn't seem right, but I guess it must be. And so I voluntarily admitted myself into the psychiatric ward. Yeah.
I mean, that doctor's delivery of that news, shout out to that doctor for being kind and clear, right?
Yes, 100%.
Because you're a smart person. You could have been like, I'm going to refute that, and here's how. Right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're not well. So
if you had not voluntarily admitted yourself, would you have then been like released to go home that night, or?
I don't know exactly. Okay. I don't know the exact requirements for what's needed for an involuntary commitment. I don't know if I would have qualified. I wasn't making physical threats against myself or anyone else. So maybe, they may have released me. I'm not sure. That would have been bad, I think. So
yeah,
I'm glad they didn't. I'm glad that didn't happen.
Right. Okay. So you voluntarily admitted yourself to the hospital. Dane goes home.
Yeah, Dane has to go home. So it's February 2021 at this point. COVID is still raging.
Great. We didn't mention that. Pandemic baby.
Pandemic baby. Yep.
Another piece to the puzzle.
Another piece of the puzzle. So there were no visitors allowed. So I was in the psychiatric ward for 6 days and I didn't get to see my, at that point, 10-day-old son or my husband that entire time.
So you go in, he's 10 days old. You come out, he's 16 days old?
Yeah. And I missed it. I mean, I missed a third of his life, you know,
Mhm.
at that time. It was a third of his life.
Right. So, throughout your stay in the hospital, can you tell us a little bit more about your mindset? I know all the answers because I totally read the book, but
I didn't on purpose.
I know. I'm watching. I'm watching Emily's face while you're telling the story, and I'm like, wait,
Just wait.
You're like, I know.
but wait, there's more. So, can you tell us a little bit about, what it felt like when you're in the hospital for those 6 days?
Yeah. So when I first got there, I was very, very manic. And I was convinced that I was actually in some sort of very experimental, specialized therapy program just for me. And that it was basically like an escape room. Like, I love escape rooms. I love puzzles. And I thought, like, oh, they have designed this specialized treatment program and it's like an escape room. And I have to find all the clues before I'll get released from the hospital. So
It's like a big test.
yeah, just like a big test. So the first couple days, I'm just like bopping around the ward looking for clues. And I think that there are clues hidden in the menus that they give us. And there's a TV playing in the day room. And I think there's clues in the commercials. I think there's a newspaper in the day room. I think there's clues in the newspaper articles. I'm like talking to other patients about how we need to all work together to find the clues. I think the other patients are actors, by the way, who have just been hired to like interact with me as part of this sort of like game room, escape room situation. So that's kind of where my head is at the first couple of days. I'm refusing medicine at this point. They are trying to get me to take an antipsychotic, and I'm refusing because I want to like
gotta keep your head in the game.
And I was like, I want to consult with my own doctor about this. Like, I don't know anything about this medicine. I don't know what the side effects are. Like, what if it has what if I have a negative reaction to it? Then what? So I'm refusing medicine, and I'm just like super manic during this time. I finally consent to starting to take medicine and slowly but surely start coming down a little bit after that point. But before that happens, I have this kind of another delusion of grandeur, thinking that it's my responsibility to help all these other patients who are in the ward with me. And so I set up my own little legal clinic in the day room. And there was a paper bag in my room that was meant to be a trash can. And they gave us crayons to do like coloring with. And I was ripping apart this paper bag and making little contracts with the crayons that other patients could sign, hiring me to be their attorney so that I could represent them in any like dealings with the hospital, or if they wanted someone to be there when they were administered their medication. There was another patient who told me that there was like something nefarious going on with the nurses administering the medication, and they were like overdosing people and trying to sedate people, and it was like all a conspiracy. So I felt like it was my responsibility to, help people survive this. At one point, we had a phone that we were able to use a couple hours a day. And I called one of my colleagues at the law firm and told him that I had a new client and I needed him to book a hotel for this client and also arrange for an Uber to come and pick her up when she got discharged. And I told him, like, I know I'm calling you from this weird number. I'll explain it later. But right now, I need you to help me with this new client. So I was very convinced that I was in this hospital ward because I was meant to be like helping all these people. And it definitely took a while, at least a couple days, for me to kind of start coming back down. But even by the time I was discharged, I was still having a lot of unusual thoughts. Like, I thought there was going to be a party for my discharge. Like, I was expecting all my friends and family members to be outside with like signs and balloons and cards. Like, it was like a graduation ceremony or something. And I was really shocked when I got downstairs and it was just my husband and our son and my father-in-law. I was like, where's the party? Like, where is everybody?
Yeah.
So I was definitely still having a lot of mania by the time I was discharged, but I wasn't having like the paranoid thinking and I wasn't having the full-on delusions anymore. And I was discharged on a Sunday and I immediately started the intensive outpatient program, the IOP. I started that the next day. So I think that's probably why they agreed to discharge me, because they knew that I was immediately going into this IOP, which is a much higher level of care.
Right.
So I think that's probably why they let me go, even though I was still pretty manic.
So before you were discharged from the hospital, did they officially diagnose you, or when did the diagnosis, when was the diagnosis made?
I actually got the diagnosis pretty early on in the IOP. So it was one of the IOP therapists. And then I think also the psychiatrist that we were working with in the program both told me what the diagnosis was.
So you were at home, you were discharged from the hospital, you're at home, and then like during the day, was it 3 hours a day that you were in the day program, correct?
Yeah, it was 3 hours a day, 4 days a week. And because of COVID, it was all on Zoom.
Oh, okay. So you didn't go anywhere. I forgot that. I forgot that detail.
Yeah.
I have amnesia. I just read the book yesterday. I remember a lot of the other details. I forgot, like, oh yeah. Because anyway, keep thinking like inpatient, like you're going in somewhere. Usually under usual non-pandemic circumstances, you would have been going in somewhere. But okay, so you were on Zoom. What was it like? Was it like group peer support?
So, it was a very structured program. So we would always start the day with morning check-in, and we could all these sessions are led by perinatal therapists. So therapists who are specialized in working with pregnant and postpartum people. And there were always about 15 to 20 of us in the program, and everyone was either pregnant or within a year of giving birth.
Is everyone at a different stage? Like, do you come in at different times, or does everyone start on the same day?
No, there's constantly people coming, and like every week there's like new people coming and people who are graduating out of the program. So it's kind of like changing, but there were people that you would be in the program with for like 3 or 4 weeks. And so you would get to know them pretty well. So we would start the day with morning check-in, and we could all just, if there was like something on our minds or something we wanted to talk about, we could kind of talk about it then with the therapist. And then there would be substantive sessions, and there were either 2 or 3 sessions, and the topics were different. It was, there was like anxiety management techniques, bonding with your baby, conflict resolution, sleep hygiene, because, that's really huge in dealing with perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So all these different classes. So they would kind of rotate, and we would do a few different classes every day. And then we would have processing group at the end of the day. And it was kind of like sitting in on somebody else's therapy session. Ooh. Like there would be a one-on-one conversation between one of the participants and a therapist, and everybody else would just kind of be there listening. And often, because we were all going through variations of the same thing, like what the therapist was saying to that participant would often apply to you too. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes it was your turn to be having those conversations. So that was kind of the structure of our day every day.
Did you have experience being in therapy before this inpatient experience, or was this your first time?
I had done a lot of individual therapy, but I had never done group therapy. And I think that was huge for my recovery. I am so grateful for this program. It's rare. I think there's only about 20 IOPs that are specific to pregnant and postpartum people in the entire country. So I am really fortunate that I live in a place that has one, and that I knew somebody who knew about it, because prior to needing this service, I didn't know that it existed. So I'm really grateful to my friend, the social worker, who told my husband about it. It was really huge for me because I felt so isolated by this diagnosis. I didn't know anyone else who had experienced postpartum psychosis. I had never heard of postpartum-onset bipolar disorder. Mm-hmm. There's no history of bipolar disorder in my family. I just felt like I'm never going to meet another person who has gone through this. No one is ever going to understand my experience. And that means no one's ever going to really understand me ever again. I'm just on this island alone forever. Mm-hmm. And then over the time that I was in the IOP, other women joined who had had psychosis and who had postpartum onset bipolar. And I was able to talk to them, and we could share stories and see the similarities in our experiences. And I realized, oh my God, I'm not alone. We're out there. There's others of us out there. There's not tons and tons, but I'm not alone like I thought I was. And that sense of solidarity and community with other people who had been through what I had been through was such a huge part of my healing.
Yeah. Just knowing that there's somebody else that sees you and understands what you're experiencing, that just makes all the difference, doesn't it?
100%. Yeah, it really does.
Okay, so you graduate from your IOP, and then what happened?
So then I go back to work and I try to kind of resume my normal life. But then, as happens with bipolar, I swung in the opposite direction and hit a really bad depressive phase. And so I was only back at work for about 3 weeks, and I was just the depression was so bad that I was having a lot of trouble functioning. And so I was doing the IOP program had aftercare that you could do where like every week or every other week there was like a session and it was just drop in and you could join if you wanted to. And I did one of those, and another woman was talking about how she wished, she was really struggling and she wished that she was back in the IOP, and the therapist said like, well, that's an option. Like if you think you need to come back in, we can talk about that. And I was like, oh, that's an option. Like I want to do that.
Ooh.
You're like, where do I sign up? All right.
Yeah. So I did. So I took medical leave from work and I went back into the program and was in it for another month. One of the great things about the program is that you have access to a perinatal psychiatrist twice a week. So they were able to make a bunch of adjustments to my medication much faster than they could have done if I was on the outside. Because, it's really hard to get appointments with specialists. I mean, it could have taken me years to cycle through the various combinations of medicines that we were able to go through in the 4 months that I was in the program. So by the time I discharged the second time, we had found a combination of medicines that worked really well for me, and I was nice and stable and back to my baseline and kind of ready to resume my normal life at that point.
Yes.
Wow.
Okay, so all of this is happening. Have you at any point during all of this heard about PSI? Like, are other professionals talking about it? Are other people in the group talking about it? Like, when does PSI come into your life?
Through the therapist at the IOP. And I think it was particularly, so we would have discharge days. And whenever somebody was discharging from the program, it was kind of like a celebratory thing. And
that's the party that you've been waiting
that's
for.
The party. That was my party. So I got a party in the end. I just had to wait for it.
Somewhere you knew that you deserved it. You just didn't know when it was going to come.
I knew a party was coming my way.
Yeah.
But they would have these discharge days. And it was during the processing time at the end of the day. And they would always ask the person to like talk about their experience and, how they felt the program helped them. And that was meant to be encouraging to all the newer participants in the program because, you start the program and you just kind of think like, this isn't going to do anything. Like I'm just sitting here on Zoom for 3 hours a day. Like, what is this going to do? Talking to all these like sad, depressed women, like this is not going to help. And so then on discharge day, you hear from people about how it actually does help and you just have to like trust the process and, really give it your all and give it your focus. And so during the discharge days, they would talk about aftercare planning. And so the therapist talked about PSI and about the fact that they have all these online free support groups and that there's all these different ones. Like there's one for people with OCD and one for people whose babies were in the NICU and one for people who are in the military and all these different specialized groups. So the therapists told us about that. And that was my first exposure to PSI.
Nice.
And you were like, oh, I like support groups.
Yes.
I was signed up twice.
Yeah. Turns out I'm a fan of this. So I started going to the PSI support groups. And at the time, unfortunately, the bipolar group had not been formed yet. I would have loved it if it had been. There is one now, so that's great. There is a psychosis group for psychosis survivors, so that's great too, particularly since it's so much more rare. It's extra hard to find other people who have had that experience, so I think it's even more beneficial that a group like that exists.
Right. And I think it's more stigmatized too. So like if you have had that experience, you may not be willing to say it or participate in a group, which means being able to be online, people in that group are in New York and LA and Chicago and in Lawrence, Kansas, which is where the University of Kansas is, in case anyone's wondering.
Oh, okay.
Random facts that live in my head. Who knew? But yeah, so I love that. I love that like your village doesn't have to be right outside your door. Like your village can be a group of people that are online. They are, in fact, real people.
Yeah, it's true. Like, people say that the internet can be just this really awful place, and it can be.
It can.
But it can also be a really great place when it's used for the right reasons, and this is one of them.
Speaking of getting peer support, when did the peer mentor program slide into your life? Was it the support group that you attended first and then somehow you heard about the peer mentor program?
Yes. So I attended a PSI support group and someone mentioned the peer mentor program and I looked into it and it sounded great. They pair you with somebody who's at least 1 year recovered and they try to match you with somebody who has really similar experiences to what you had. And so I applied for the program and I was paired with this really awesome mentor who had bipolar disorder, but her life was just so together. Like she had this successful career and she had a successful marriage. And, at the time I was so scared about this bipolar diagnosis because I didn't know much about bipolar. And what I did know were like the most sensationalized stories that get picked up by the media about these really terrible outcomes. And I just felt like if this is the club that I'm being forced to join, I'm doomed. Like my life is over. And meeting her and talking to her and seeing this example of somebody with bipolar who was still just thriving and living this great life gave me hope that, okay, I can too. If she can do it, I can do it. And that was just so encouraging. The program lasts 6 months and we would talk on the phone once a week. And I had a million questions for her and she was very patient and answered them all. And that was really huge for me.
Shout out to Mika.
Yeah, shout out to Mika. Thank you, Mika.
Oh, I met Mika when I was a mentor in the peer mentor program. That was like that's how I started. That's how I was first connected with PSI as a peer mentor.
Well, I mean, not to one up everybody or anything, but Mika has been to my house and her husband makes amazing latkes.
Jessica's like,
that's all I'm
Mika,
saying.
And I'm like, I know Mika, and you've got to come in with, and she's been to my house. Whatever. It sounded like Jessica might have had a question. Were you going to turn the microphone around?
I like it.
I wasn't going to ask a question. Okay. I was just going to say that's like a good segue into my like current involvement with PSI, which is that Mika is a former leader of the newer, well, I guess it's not so new anymore, but at the time it was new, Bipolar Support Group that PSI had. She was one of the leaders and they were looking for an additional peer leader for the group. And she said she thought that I would be a good fit for it. So I applied, and I am now a proud peer leader for PSI's bipolar group. And
round of applause.
Yeah. Yes. Party. We're having another. I wish I had like one of those, you blow in it in the party.
Ooh, that'd be fun. I would be into that.
Wouldn't that be cool if I had just props sitting here and we could have another
I would love
party
it. Like
for
a
Jessica?
Prop basket.
Yes.
As we all know, I love
Write
it when
that down.
people throw parties for me.
Yes.
So.
Jessica likes parties. No, I'm just kidding.
Big fan.
You're a party fan. That is so cool. And as you've explained, having somebody that understands what you went through was so important for you. And that's the cool thing about the support groups here. They try very hard to have the leaders of the support groups be people that
have that lived experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really important. An important part for like, you're holding this brave space for people that they know that you understand where they're coming from. And that really helps people kind of come out of their shell and be brave and share some of their story because it's scary talking about what's real.
Yeah.
Okay. So you are now more than 1 year away from this, right? You're
almost 2, coming up on 2.
Yeah, coming up on 2. I would say, people ask, when did I feel fully recovered? Like, when did I feel back to myself? And I would say 6 months postpartum. So, and my son is 2. So I'm a year and a half out of the bad times.
And I would assume that is not including the fact that babies are hard under no diagnosis, no postpartum anything experience. Toddlers can be hard. Potty training is hard. So you're not saying that like your entire life is all rainbows and unicorns, which is totally a reference to the book, by the way. But that like you are now re-equipped with the skills that you had possessed before to like handle your life, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, of course I still have problems. I'm a human and I live in an imperfect world with other, imperfect humans. And I, in fact, am potty training. So
yeah, that's why I said that. How's it going?
Yeah. I mean, just great. It's just really great.
Send up a flare. Like, send up a flare if you need to.
I need it. I just ordered more toddler underwear yesterday because we just burned through it at an incredible rate that you would not believe. So yeah, I mean, I'm still a normal person. I still have problems, but I can handle them now.
So Jessica, you wrote this really incredible book, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, and you were so humble. You have not even spoken about it. But basically, you've shared so much.
I know, we're like, buy the book.
Yeah.
I mean, thank you. I appreciate it. You guys are like my little unpaid PR team. It's great.
Yeah. She did not pay us.
Happy to help. I know, we're going to get the bill for that email later. Jeez.
Yeah. I'm not emailing you, though. I'm telling you that. Nope. Anyway, nothing that'll require anything over 6 minutes of your time, though. But just as somebody, my PMADs were postpartum anxiety and depression and OCD, and I did not experience bipolar onset. I did not experience psychosis or like manic episodes. And so what I really love about your book is that I have an idea of just like how you explained the chain of events, how things unfolded. I can understand what your mindset was going through that. And that is, this is a story that I have not heard a lot because I've heard a lot of people talk about postpartum depression and a bit about anxiety because I discovered later in life that I have always had generalized anxiety. So there are some PMADs that I know a bit more about, and I'm really, really excited that you've written this book. It's a great read if you're interested in hearing somebody's perspective who has been there, something other than you mentioned, like sensationalized stories about negative outcomes. This is something different. And I really love how you shared your story. So good job. Good job.
Thank you.
Way to go, friend.
The different is more common. Like different than sensational is more common, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I wrote the book, it was really with two goals in mind. One was to describe an experience that, while rare, is not unheard of.
Yes.
When you think of all the people who have babies every year in the United States, and 1 to 2 in 1,000 of us is going to experience this. It's not an insignificant number of people. And so I wanted to create a firsthand account of what it felt like, both to educate as to what psychosis actually feels like, because I felt like there's just so little information out there about that. And also to help create that sense of solidarity and hope that I got from being in the IOP with these other women who had experienced psychosis. And I thought, not everybody who goes through this is going to be lucky enough to have a perinatal IOP in their area that they can join. So, maybe I can try to provide a bit of that same sense of solidarity through the book.
Yeah.
Success.
Thank you.
Yes.
You did it. We're throwing another party. Quick. Drop the confetti. Turn on the party lights.
Are we ready for the...
We need to hit the lightning round. Yeah. But I love the way that you delivered your story. So we'll put a link in the show notes to all the things we've talked about, especially the book.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes. Should we get started? Jessica, are you ready?
I'm ready.
To answer some quick, fun questions.
Yep.
Okay. What's your favorite podcast?
Other than this one.
Other than this one, obviously, the usual caveat applies. So I have two vastly different favorite podcasts. One of them is the Ezra Klein Show. He is my favorite interviewer. He's a writer for Vox.
Oh, nice.
He's fantastic. He is so insightful and thoughtful, and he asks the best questions, and he has the most interesting conversations with his guests. And he finds such interesting people to talk to about a wide range of topics that I never knew I cared about until he interviewed someone about them. And then I suddenly realized that I care deeply. I was just listening to an episode of his where he interviews a pain psychologist about how the body creates pain and how it's never just damaged tissue, but there's always a psychological element that is impacted by the exact circumstances and who you're around and what your prior history with pain is and all these things, and talking about all these fascinating experiences. It totally made me rethink just the concept of pain. So when I want something thought-provoking, Ezra Klein Show.
Great.
When I want something that is just lighthearted and fun, I love Bachelor Happy Hour, which is a podcast from Bachelor Nation. previously shared with you my my affinity for The Bachelor and my concern for the safety and well-being of its contestants.
Yes, I remember that. Yes.
Yes, but when I'm not threatening to sue ABC, I think that The Bachelor and Bachelorette, and especially Bachelor in Paradise, are very fun. And so it is a recap show. I apologize. I think I said it was called Bachelor Party or Bachelor Happy Hour. It's actually Bachelor Party. There are many Bachelor Universe podcasts, but Bachelor Party.
Party. Okay. We want to make sure we get that right.
Yeah,
okay.
Bachelor Party. That's my fave.
Nice. Well, are you a book in your ear or book in your hand kind of person?
I am both simultaneously. I always have one of each going.
No. Okay. So you're reading Super Sad Unicorn and listening to it?
No, not at the same
I'm sorry.
time. That's not what she means.
I said that in a confusing way. I meant that
I understood.
Okay. I meant that I always have a physical book in my living room that I'm reading, but I also always have an audiobook that I'm listening to at separate times.
Oh, gotcha. Because, you're not reading a book walking down the street, but you're listening to something in your ear or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
And they're different books. I know some people who will download the audiobook and then have the physical book and they'll switch back and forth between the two. I don't do that. I have the two books are different.
Oh, okay.
I think that's what I do. Because if I want, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to do a thing.
Or you're out in your garden.
Right. I want to hear. I want to be able to do something with my hands.
Yes.
But if I'm relaxing, trying to fall asleep. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Anything especially interesting that you're reading or listening to right now?
Yeah, I'm reading and listening to some really good ones right now. I'm listening to The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai, which came out last year or the year before. Got a lot of buzz when it came out. It is about the AIDS epidemic in Chicago in the 80s, and it's told in two timelines. So that's one of the timelines. The other timeline flashes forward to 2015, and it follows the sister of one of the characters from the 1985 timeline, who is searching for her missing daughter who joined a cult. And so both timelines are really interesting. The writing is great. So I love that. And then my physical book that I'm reading is The Winners by Fredrik Backman. And it is the third in the Beartown trilogy about this small town in Sweden that is obsessed with hockey and has another small town that it's its bitter rival, and the towns might have to merge their hockey clubs. And it's
drama.
Great. I know. Even if you don't care about sports, the writing is so good. The character development is so good. And I read the first two books in the trilogy, so I was very excited when this one came out.
Oh, nice.
I wrote both of those down.
Yeah, those they sound good. What is your go-to for a quick mental break?
Quick mental break, I would say there is a blog that I have followed for 10 years probably. It's been around forever. And it's called, actually, she changed the name. It used to be called Capitol Hill Style because she was a DC staffer at the time she started this blog. And it is just kind of a combination of business appropriate fashion, but also just kind of women in the workplace stuff. And she always links interesting articles, and she'll do Friday happy hour cocktail recipes, but also stuff about pay disparities. And, it's just a wide variety of things. But I feel like she and I have very shared interests. So I always like the stuff that she shares, and I like her fashion sense too. So,
nice.
When I just want little hit of fashion or just one article, I like that blog a lot.
Awesome. That sounds great. What is your favorite parenting hack?
Ooh, favorite parenting hack. I think it's probably my son is 2, and he's at a stage where he's very focused on independence. And I found that if I'm ever trying to get him to do something, if I offer 2 acceptable choices, that tends to work better. So I don't just say, we're going to put on pants now. I say, do you want the blue pants or the orange pants? And that works a lot better.
Yes. We're going to do this thing, but I'm going to make you think that you've got 100% choice in what exactly is happening. That's a pro move right there.
Yeah.
Yes.
That one. I mean, I can't claim to have come up with that. I did not, but it works.
Yeah, that's a smart move. I like it. So, Jessica, last question of the lightning round. What is one way that you'll show yourself some radical love today?
Ooh, let's see. Radical love. That's a great question.
Yeah. It's okay. I'll just keep making noises so I can draw it out and you can keep thinking. It's okay.
Okay.
Radical.
Perfect.
It's not distracting.
It's the word radical that's throwing me. I'm trying to think of anything that's like noteworthy enough that it could be considered radical.
Is this totally radical?
Yeah.
How will you show yourself some love today?
Yeah, that one I can answer more easily, I would say. I am going to watch an episode of Fleischman is in Trouble after my son goes to bed. Read the book and loved it, and the show has been great so far. Jesse Eisenberg and Claire Danes, amazing. So I'm going to watch an episode and maybe even drink a glass of wine. Who knows?
Oh, snap. What is that? What do you watch that on? Is that like Apple TV?
It's on Hulu, I believe.
That's the only one I don't have.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Well, Jessica, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing your story. We are so glad that you spent the time to sit down with us. So thank you.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I owe such a debt of gratitude to PSI for everything that it has done for me. And I love that I get to continue being part of the organization. And I am grateful for the chance to share my story here.
The organization is lucky to have you.
We are lucky to have
for real.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the I Am One podcast. Check out today's show notes where we'll drop links to all the important things that we mentioned in this episode. Please consider sharing about our show on social media and following and rating our show wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. It only takes a minute of your time and, well, that'll help with our collective mission of bringing resources and local support to folks worldwide. From everyone here at PSI, thanks again for listening.